Yes, it's time for The World This Week, 7 days for Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. And with us is reporter Janine DiGiovanni, her latest book, Ghosts by Daylight, published by Knopf. Welcome to the show. Welcome as well to Amr Abed Rabo, a photojournalist who's been chalking up the frequent flyer miles of late. Thanks for being with us here in the studio.
Thanks for inviting me.
Stéphane de Vries, the correspondent in Paris for the Dutch broadcaster RTL4. Welcome back, sir, and welcome back to Judah Grunstein of World Politics Review, which you can also find at worldpoliticsreview.com. Thank you, sir. The World This Week, which you can find on Facebook, and you can weigh in on the conversation there throughout the week, and on Twitter, our handle at FrançoisF24. In Syria, the situation this week, basically we went from heavy shelling and shooting at the Turkish border that everyone was focusing on to diplomacy towards the end of the week at the UN in New York. And after a tenuous Thursday ceasefire, Thursday becoming the new Tuesday, went into effect, the question was, would protesters turn out after Friday prayer? Those the images this Friday in Dera, where the uprising began 1 year ago. Amr Abed Rabo, your reaction when you see those images?
It's very interesting, the new trend, let's say, that's been for the last week on many demonstrations or Facebook, etc., is the word all Syrians. Now people talk about revolution for all Syrians, a better future for all Syrians. It's very important this way to insist on uniting Syrians, not dividing them, not talking anymore about Alawites or Sunnis or Christians or whatever. So
that's interesting because the diplomats at first were paying, it seemed, a little bit lip service to the concept of arming the uprising, and the Western diplomats, at least, pulling back from that stance. And inside of Syria, there's wariness then when it comes to armed rebellion.
Everybody's not convinced that arms and weapons is the best option. You know, I mean, this movement has been for maybe 8 months quite pacific movement, and then in the last 5 or 6 months, it's been more with weapons. I'm not sure it's the best option for the revolution. It's not the best option to change the regime, because the regime loves the idea of having weapons facing him. I saw this week Fadwa Suleiman, the Syrian actress, who was an icon for the revolution. And she told me that it was amazing that in many of the cities you could have a lot of weapons coming from Iraq or from Lebanon, etc., but you couldn't have one single medicine. Medicine could not go through, but weapons could go through, because probably the regime wants weapons to get in and then say, look, there are weapons, we're being attacked, etc., etc. So...
and what's your sense in terms of the situation with the Annan peace plan? Originally it was to be for Tuesday, then it was for Thursday. Has the fighting subsided? We know there have been ceasefire violations, but has the fighting subsided?
Today it seems that there's no heavy shelling, at least, which is very good. Let's wait and see. It's very early now to know if it's going to last or not. But in my opinion, I'm not sure the Annan. Syria has the Syrian regime. Has a very long history with these Arab League, UN, during the Hariri Commission. The International Court, etc., etc. They know how to deal with these things. They buy time. They show some sign of goodwill, then they do what they want to do, etc. So I'm not sure it's the best option. But still, the Syrians are still angry. The Syrians don't fear anymore the regime. This has not changed. And as I said earlier, before in this place, I don't think the answer should come from New York or from Doha or from Riyadh or from Paris. The Syrian regime has one day to deal with Daraa. He has to deal with the Zabadani or with
the cities inside
Homs,
inside
the cities
country.
Inside, and the people who are angry and who are demonstrating.
But for now, Janine DiGiovanni, there was an editorial in The Guardian this Friday headlined that the Annan plan is the only plan in town.
Well, I'm very cynical when it comes to diplomacy, which doesn't have intervention backing it up. I came last weekend from the anniversary of the beginning of the war in Bosnia, where I was a reporter, and I see terrible parallels. And for those of us that were in Bosnia during the war, there is this memory of the constant diplomacy that went on for 3 years, the Geneva peace talks, David Owen, the Vance Owen plan, amounting to nothing in the end. So I'm very wary of Kofi Annan and the 6-point plan. I think that I think in this case that in many ways Assad is like a Milosevic, that I think he does need force backed up by talking. Talking alone won't do it with him. The other thing I have to point out, and I may be a cynic, is that we have to remember that Kofi Annan presided over 2 genocides, Srebrenica and Rwanda, while he was the head of peacekeeping operations. So this isn't a great track record in terms of diplomacy. I think it's too soon. You know, it's just this week that we have to wait and see how far he's going to be able to push it. But I am very cynical.
Right, so you need force to back it up. By the way, for a balanced account of what's going on inside Syria, let's see how Damascus is reporting the story.
The armed terrorist groups have continued their criminal operations that target civilians and army personnel in an attempt to deal a blow to Syria's stability and undermine any efforts to find a political solution to the crisis.
State television there. A week ago on this very set, there was consensus, as what you were pointing out, the stalling for time, that Assad had bought himself time and that Russia and China had his back. However, even though the Syrian foreign minister went to Moscow earlier this week, by Friday, Damascus's diplomatic backers seemed, at least in parlance, to be reviewing their rhetoric.
We hope Syrian government will fully and credibly meet its obligations to implement ceasefire, to continue to give its support cooperation to Kofi Annan's mediation efforts.
It's crucial for the monitors to be on the ground to make sure that any transgressions of the current state of end of violence is going to be detected.
Judah Grunstein, are you noticing a shift in what Moscow and Beijing are saying?
Well, I think, yeah, there has been a shift over the course of the last several weeks, especially with regards to Russia. And I think in general at the UN, in this kind of situation, people look first to Russia because China generally doesn't like to be isolated on the Security Council in terms of blocking something that has a consensus otherwise. So, yeah, Russia's been definitely allowing a little more diplomacy at the UN, even the declaration from the Council if it wasn't a resolution. And the question has been for the last few weeks, how far essentially can Assad go with the brutality before he loses Russia's willingness to support him and to stonewall any
so
kind of movement.
Why is Russia beginning to waver at this time?
Because for them it's a diplomatic disaster to be perceived as they are as the one thing between stopping a murderous campaign against civilians. They lose quite a bit of credibility. And
following up on Janine's point, there's the issue of if those observers go in, as Vitaly Churkin was saying there, do they do so with the full force? I believe in UN, in diplomatic ease, they talk about Article 6, about the ability to back it up with force if need be.
I'm not really sure. I think that would be determined before they go in. I'm not really sure if the peace plan itself has determined what the rules of engagement would be. One thing I'd add, though, with regard to Russia, they're sort of setting the stage where they can move back or allow more room for movement at the UN. At the same time, they've just deployed warships off the Syrian coast, in essentially showing that they're not going to allow some sort of operation outside of the Security Council. There was some suggestion when there was shots over the border into Turkey that it could begin to involve NATO under an Article 5 self-defense, mutual defense clause. And I think that Russia is very clearly showing that they're willing to talk, they're willing to see how things evolve. I think they do care about the perception because they have interests, but at the same time, in the Middle East, with the Middle East changing as much as it is, they can't really afford to have all their eggs in a basket that's about to go under when they need to start developing relationships outside of Syria throughout the Middle East as well.
Do you think they really care about human rights, given their own track record in Chechnya and what they've done? I mean, do you really think that it's for them a humanitarian matter, or is it more a diplomatic
I didn't say that. I said it's an image question. The Middle East is changing so dramatically and so quickly right now, and Russia really only has Syria. If the Syrian regime is doomed, which it seems like it is, I think even if you're talking about a horrific 3-year process, as tragic and as horrible as that is, the consensus is that the Assad regime is essentially doomed in the long term. If that's the case, then Russia can't afford to be seen as the one last supporter, because then they're locked out of the Middle East for another generation.
Stefan de Vries, last year you wrote a book on the Arab Spring.
Yes. Yeah.
Is it still spring when you listen to what Judah and Janine are saying?
Well, if it is still spring, it's a very cold spring right now. We see in many countries, Egypt, Tunisia, frictions. Well, that's a euphemism. But it's not bringing us what we hoped. But at the same time, it's been a very short period as well. It's only 13, 14 months that these revolutions started. And you cannot change a whole part of the world within 14 months according to the Western model, which we would like to impose, and which I think is not a very good idea. So maybe our expectations are too high. Any revolution is a very dangerous struggle, and well, it needs a lot of time. And unfortunately, in Syria, it needs even more time than in the other countries. And
needs more time, but at the same time, Amar, there seems to be fatigue on the part of the general public. This has been going on for a year. We're up to more than 12,000 dead, according to some figures, countless refugees. And yet it's not an issue, as we were mentioning before the show, in the campaigns in both France and the United States.
I'm very surprised. I mean, in France, it's only 4 hours of plane away. And it's a real question of principle. I mean, it's not that complicated issue. It's matter of principle, it's a matter of freedom, it's a matter of democracy. So I would expect more candidates to talk about it, or to give a firm position, a firm stand. And quote, there's nothing of this. I mean, it's not, there was a few weeks ago a text in the Nouvel Observateur signed by a few of the candidates saying that whoever we are and any one of us would win would keep the same position on Syria. But that was, I mean, I haven't seen it mentioned anywhere in the press or in the media. It's not in meetings, nobody talk about it.
Compassion fatigue. There is this terrible term that was coined in the 90s during the wars in Africa and Bosnia called compassion fatigue, which I find so cynical and so tragic, which basically is that television viewers or readers of papers, they can only take so much before they shut down completely. And I think after Homs, everyone had this awful dose of the slaughter and Assad really going in for killing his own people. And now it's almost as though everyone is focused on the French campaign, the American campaign. They want to think inwardly. They don't really want to go outside. And what is happening there is brutal and might have absolutely disastrous repercussions on the entire region. And it's almost as though people don't want to address it now. I
mean, even in magazines or in newspapers, when you talk about it, as you said, I mean, it's been the peak, maybe it was in February or in March, and now we only have the toll of death every day, maybe
and so
100, 80, 60, whatever.
Next Tuesday here in the capital, there's going to be a rally of intellectuals and perhaps more.
Absolutely.
And
Tuesday
will that galvanize people? Will they be able to be heard in the final week of a presidential election campaign?
I hope so. I mean, Tuesday is the Independence Day for Syria. It's 17 April. And there's a big campaign called Stop the Violence. And there is a lot of French writers, intellectuals, directors, etc., who are joining at Trocadero. But even if people are not in Paris, I really would like people to take care of this and have a look and maybe take pictures of themselves, put them on social networks, because for the Syrian people, it's important. I mean, for Syrians, it's important to know that we think about them. We didn't forget about them. If our candidates or if our politicians forgot about them, the people care about what's happening, care about the killing, care about the torture, etc., etc. And it's a very simple campaign, you know. It's not very complicated. You can do a photo with your mobile phone
It's
and
also
post
so
it.
they don't feel isolated. I think
Exactly.
when people are going through something like this, and especially in the case of Syria, where journalists can't go, where we can't go, for me, whenever a journalist can't go somewhere, you know really evil things are happening. But the people inside feel incredibly isolated and cut off. And I think we have to keep this sense going that they are not alone, that they do have supporters, that there are people there that are fighting for some kind of intervention and an end to the killing.
I'd add also that it really is a testament to the depth of the commitment of the Syrian opposition and the people who are demonstrating, the fact that in the face of the brutality, every time there has been a spike in the brutality, they've come back and just shown that this is not going to go away, that they're not going to go away. And I think that what you said earlier about the answer having to come from Syria, I think that the Syrian people are showing that each time, and it's understandably frustrating that people tend to become, and the media as well tends to become sensitized or desensitized, and their threshold tends to adapt to the level of violence that's going on. At the same time, the very difficult thing about Syria, or the two difficult things, are the first thing that is that the regime obviously cannot stamp out the opposition and the resistance, even with incredible violence. And the opposition and the resistance can't necessarily overthrow the regime peaceably or with violence. The second thing is that any sort of intervention from the outside, even though I agree that without a threat of intervention, diplomacy is a lot less effective.
Futile.
The problem is that any intervention would be so extremely complicated in terms of international diplomacy.
We're definitely not there yet. When we come back in The World This Week, we're going to be talking about two presidential campaigns, one on each side of the Atlantic, and the 100th anniversary of a certain nautical disaster. Stay with us.